First of all, welcome you all to our session, Greening China's Belt and Road Initiative. My name is Ma Jun. I'm the chairperson of Green Finance Committee and also a member of the Tsinghua University. It's my pleasure to moderate this session. We are supported by the Ministry of Environment. So we are very honored to have with us Vice Minister of Environment and Ecology, Zhao Yingmin, to give us a speech during this forum. Let me introduce our guests, including Vice Minister Zhao Yingmin, and also Mr. Chanthol, Senior Minister of Public Works and Transport of Cambodia.
Country Director and Chief Representative for Foundation. And 我们还有伊利集团。
Also, we have Mr. Zhang Jianqiu from Inner Mongolia Yili Industrial Group, and also Jeremy Haegeli from Swiss Re.
On our panel， 我想在进入到嘉宾演讲之前。
So before we go into presentations, let me start by very briefly laying down the groundwork for our discussion. Why we discuss greening China's BRI? There are three major backgrounds. In many BRI countries, they have fragile ecological environment. Let me give you some examples. Earlier this year, I went to visit Mongolia. During winter, the PM 2.5 index sometimes can go up to 2,000. So if you spend your time in Beijing several years back, you probably would have a sense of how terrible the air quality was. I also went to some South Asian countries and African states where they have a serious challenge of deforestation, drought, and desertification. Also, in some lower-income countries, 80% of the effluent was not properly treated. So when we implement BRI, we not only will focus on boosting the local economy, but also enable environmental protection to develop in parallel. This is the first backdrop for our discussion. Second, globally speaking, we are facing the challenge of climate change, and many experts are calling to change the term from climate change to climate crisis, just to give you the sense of urgency of the challenge. Because in the past 1 century, a lot of the fossil fuels were consumed to power our economic growth. The surface temperature already grew by 1 degree Celsius in the past 1 century. If we continue to follow current pathway, the future temperature rise could be between 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, which will threaten 50% of the living species on this planet, and also the sea level will rise 2 to 3 meters, posing a great threat to the coastal lines of different countries. So if we want to cope with this challenge, we have to address the pollution and emission from transportation and infrastructure, such as building. And BRI is exactly such a initiative to develop infrastructure. And it is critical for us to focus on the greenness of these projects. The third thing I want to mention is that the challenge cannot be overcome by any single country alone. I think on this regard, BRI offers a very precious platform for us to pull together our resources to make collective efforts.
Contribute to resolving the environmental and climate issues, because the Belt and Road Initiative has the biggest convening power. 100多个国家，刚才 Elizabeth 问我什么叫“一带一路”定。
Because BRI comprises over 100 countries. looking into the future, BRI may mobilize huge amounts of financial power, and if we can make the investments green, this will be a very critical contribution we make to the world. So this is why we chose greening China's BRI as the topic for our session. And I also want to mention that China recently jointly launched a green investment principle together with the London City. We invited many international members to sign on board, and at present we already attracted 29 financial institutions from across the world to comply with the green investment principles under BRI, and we remain open to welcome more financial institutions to join our efforts and take part in the green BRI investments. So much for me. I will now invite our guests to speak. First, Vice Minister Zhao from the Ministry of Environment and Ecology of China to give us some introduction regarding the Green Alliance pioneered by the ministry and other policies and practices. Thank you, moderator, for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to come here and meet all of you to jointly discuss Green BRI. The moderator has raised one very important point, which is that the current world is at a critical juncture of profound changes unseen in the past 100 years. And green development is a critical solution and the key to resolving many challenges we face globally. And Green BRI offers a very important pathway for us to achieve that target. And it has been our intention and also our commitment to boost local economies through BRI. And this April, during the second international Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation, China's President Xi Jinping re-emphasized the importance of green development for implementing BRI. And during this second BRI forum, Green Alliance and Green Ecological Big Data Platform were launched to facilitate green technology transfer and exchange under BRI framework. We also launched South-South cooperation and a number of important outcomes of the forum. In the past 6 years since BRI was first proposed, China and BRI countries were actively engaged in cooperation in the field of ecological preservation and environmental protection. For example, we participated in UN sessions, BRICS, environmental minister meetings. So far, together with 33 BRI countries, the Ministry of Ecology and Environment have inked cooperation agreements. Second, we are also developing new platforms for cooperation. Together with the Ministry of Environment of Cambodia, we launched a bilateral scheme in Kenya and Laos. We are also in the process of building a cooperation center and establishing collaborative office. We also jointly launched a Green Development Alliance for BRI, which already attracted 130 international and domestic institutions, including WEF, which has very recently joined this alliance. Among the members are state governments, international organizations, think tanks, and business members. Number 3, we are also deepening our collaboration at the policy level. Today's session is an example of policy exchange. We also organized the Green Development Pathway breakout session and China-ASEAN Green Development Cooperation meeting in the field of green development and ecologically friendly cities. We organized over 20 sessions, attracting over 1,000 delegates from the world. Fourth, we are also earnestly implementing a number of outcomes. I just mentioned the big data platform. We are very vigorously implementing many important outcomes to facilitate information, knowledge sharing among all BRI countries to offer support for decision making in various markets. We also offered training sessions for environmental authorities from BRI countries. We have so far offered over 2,000 training opportunities. In the coming 3 years, another 1,500 training opportunities will be provided to environmental officers from BRI countries, covering 120 countries. And China is also collaborating with many countries to implement the South-South cooperation plan under the Paris Agreement so that we can meet our targets for climate change. So green BRI is very important and requires collective efforts. This is an important way for us to implement the green development philosophy and also the attainment of UN 2030 SDGs. I firmly believe that through our collective efforts, we will achieve very fruitful results for green BRI. Well, thank you, Minister Zhao, for your kind introduction regarding the measures at the Ministry of Ecology and the Environment.
How you see BII from a Cambodian perspective, especially the green BII or green investments, what do these things mean to your country?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. What infrastructure play a major role in the economic development and of the country and also enhance the productivities of the economy. There's a proverb in China that if you want to get rich, build a road first. Very similar to the proverb in Cambodia, is where there's a road, there's hope. But most government in the world lack the resource to finance the infrastructure that can enhance productivity and also enhance physical and people-people connectivities. So in this regard, the government of Cambodia is very appreciative of the many initiatives by China, the BNI initiative, the Silk Road Fund, the 21st Maritime Silk Road Fund, and also the IIB, the infrastructure, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, we also heard the criticism of the BRI as the geopolitical tool, maybe a plot by China to make other country fall into the debt trap, like debt trap diplomacy. But I beg to differ, especially in my country. We do not have any issue with external debt trap. Our debt to GDP ratio is only 21%. So it's up to each country to manage its own debt to build the infrastructure. And with the support from the BRI and the funding from China, we managed to build 3,000 kilometers of new road or rehabilitate the road. We built 7 major bridges crossing the Mekong River, crossing the Tonle Sap in Cambodia, close to the 8 kilometers of bridges. We also built a river port. And recently, for the first time in the history of Cambodia, we had the first expressway that financed by BNI, connecting the Phnom Penh capital city to the deep sea port of Sinopville, a $2 billion project. Today, it takes probably 8 hours to go 200 kilometers to the deep sea port. The road is so congested. So we asked for the support. Again, we talk about the green investment, so we decide to invest on a BOT basis, a $2 billion project to alleviate the traffic congestion that can cause the pollution and also traffic accidents and so on and so forth. So for the first time, we get the expressway in Cambodia. Now, we talk about the overall green infrastructure, green B&I, we're very supportive of that. However, we lack the capacity. So I urge China, I urge the private sector and the development partners to share with us the best practices around the world. How can we build a better infrastructure that does not impact the environment? All those AV projects in Cambodia financed by BRI or from any other development partners must be submitted with the EIA. Without a proper EIA, they will not finance the project. Having said that, we still do not have enough capacity, or we do not really know what the standard. So I like to see that you publish the criteria, the standard that we can adapt to the situation of each country to implement the BNI or the Green BNI initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chanthol. Regarding capacity building, let me just mention that Tsinghua University has created this program called Green Finance Leadership Program starting from a year ago. And since then, we have provided the 3 capacity building activities in China and also in Africa recently. And in total, we brought in, I think, close to 500 officials and financial sector leaders from more than 50 countries. I think there's only 1 or 2 participants from Cambodia. We need to bring more of your colleagues over. Many of the issues you mentioned, including standards for green investment and also disclosure, as well as instruments for green finance and green investments. Thank you very much. Let me now ask Elizabeth Knup from Ford Foundation on your views regarding green investment and greener Belt and Road.
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone coming to this session. There's a lot of competition for this session, so we're really happy to see you here. I'll take a slightly different perspective. So the Belt and Road Initiative has been somewhat officially launched for about 5 years, and there have been 2 reports that I'm aware of recently for the English-speaking world that have just recently been published. One by the World Bank, looking at transportation lines as a sub-part of the Belt and Road, and the impact of transportation corridors on the recipient countries. And also the Asia Policy Institute at the Asia Society has also come out with a report on called Navigating the Belt and Road. And both of these reports come to a similar conclusion, which is, as my colleague on the panel said, every country's different, right? So the experiences in different countries are not going to be the same and not going to be consistent. But a couple things are kind of consistent across. And one is that not only do Chinese financial institutions and the regulatory side on the Chinese side need to continue to enhance their policy frameworks and their adherence to standards around transparency and ESG, et cetera, but also recipient countries need to build their capacity to be able to engage with China from a position of knowledge and strength when negotiating Belt and Road projects. So there needs to be a combination of efforts from both sides, because I think we all recognize that some Belt and Road projects have good impacts, some have mixed impacts. You can build a road that's really important and really helpful for connectivity and for economic development, but it may not be perfect for the communities that the road goes through or the environment through which the road is built. So these are complicated projects. I think the environmental and social impact assessment process needs to be strengthened throughout. Some of the recommendations in these two reports suggest perhaps China could set up a project preparation fund that would fund recipient countries to build capacity, to bring in capacity, to evaluate projects before they're started. There's a lot of emphasis on pre-project planning to make sure that really all the dimensions and the impacts of the projects are thought through from the beginning and designed for from the beginning. And all of these things just recognize that both the investors, whether they're Chinese or other investors, and the countries into which the investment are going need to have more communication and more knowledge, and also more of an understanding of the multi-dimensional impact of any infrastructure project on communities, on environment, different ways in which different gendered people are affected by infrastructure. So these are all things that I think after 5 years, we can now move to the next level of sophistication in how we think about these projects and how we prepare them. And I'll just make one more comment, which is, China actually, from a environmental point of view, has developed a lot of its own cutting-edge technology, has a lot of approaches inside China that are quite advanced in looking at environmental protection, and those could be brought out to the Belt and Road countries. And so sometimes the countries can't afford the best kind of coal-fired power plant, so they buy from China the less good one, the less clean one. And so maybe there's a time now for China to kind of set itself a high standard, and regardless of the standard of the recipient country, bring some of the best and some of its highest standards of environmental technology or know-how or knowledge into those investment projects as part of their contribution to the project. And I just think we've entered kind of the next phase of BRI, where I think these things are now being discussed, and as was mentioned, President Xi Jinping mentioned specifically green Belt and Road and also social indicators for investment along the Belt and Road. So I think he's given a signal that China is ready to take it to the next level. And so I'll just stop there.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I think many of the points you mentioned regarding transparency, capacity building are very consistent with what we are doing under the Green Investment Principle for the Belt and Road. These principles call for investors and lenders and corporates operating in the Belt and Road region to adopt ESG-related principles and practices at the corporate governance level, be transparent on the project impact on environment and climate, and measuring these impacts, and adopting green finance instruments, practicing green supply chain methodologies. So all of these are aligned, with what you and the World Bank were suggesting. I think it's more about how to consolidate many of these efforts, on the different platforms and make them more effective in delivering to the right audience. Our members under the GIP now have sort of 3 categories. One is the Chinese, the biggest lenders are all there. And secondly, it's a developed countries, lenders and investors, including those from UK, France, and Germany. And the third category are from developing countries, the financial institutions from, for example, Mongolia, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Emirates, and so on. So there's a lot of knowledge transfer and sharing of best practices that can be done under the GIP. And if you can bring your ideas and capacity into this platform, I think could be very useful, a good synergy. Now, let me now invite our next speaker. 我们请Yili集团的
Okay, now let's welcome Mr. Zhang Jianqiu, the CEO of Yili Group, to talk about how to practice the green development, and especially along the Belt and the Road Initiative countries, for example, how to establish this supply chain. Thank you very much. After the Belt and Road Initiative had proposed, our company, as a leading dairy product company, we have making our due contributions proactively, and we have been cooperating with other countries. In our specific sector, there are two important phases in terms of green development. First of all, we emphasize in domestic market. In China, we have developed the dairy industry for about 2 decades. And in the beginning, it was developed in the very free way. So how could we improve the sustainability and produce more green product in a greener way? And we have made a lot of effort. For example, in 2007, we proposed the concept called green leadership. And in 2009, we have put this strategy as a corporate level. So from the very beginning, how do we raise cows and to the other part of the supply chain, for example, our vendor management and so on. And these have all given us a very good result. For example, as for raising cows in our production bases, we have different process, different technologies to separate the dry part and the wet part, and how can we do compost, and how do we restore farmland, and so on. And these are all the green contributions we have made. And for example, last year, as for the investment of environmental protection, we made about 300 million RMB investment. And last year, we have about 3.2 billion batches of environmental friendly packing materials. And we are also working together with environmental protection foundations to protect the wetland in the northeast area of China. And the total area of that is equal to the territory area of New Zealand. So this is why we emphasize a lot in the domestic thing that we have been doing. And the second phase is overseas. For Yili Group, when we are carrying out the Belt and Road Initiative, for example, some projects are worth mentioning, like our project in New Zealand. We have made a huge investment to create a base, and we have therefore been able to export China's standard and also China's technology. And also, for example, we have an M&A project with a Thailand ice cream manufacturer, one of the biggest in Thailand. And we have also been able to export our green concept to Thailand. And therefore, I believe for China's companies, not only we should do a good job in China, and we should also spreading our solutions and our technologies and our best practices to other countries, so that we can able to get a win-win result, or maybe multi-win result. And this year we have another project with about 700 companies from 32 countries in the world. We have established a system to share information to create a better health for the citizens, which include innovations, public welfare, nutrition, healthcare, green development, and so on, with the common purpose that we hope to achieve sustainable development across the whole industrial chain. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhang. And next, we would like to invite Jeremy from Swiss Re to talk about the green development for Belt and Road Initiative.
Greener Belt and Road.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Ma, for moderating super important session at a super important place on a very important project, the Belt and Road Initiative. If I look at how insurance companies as well as long-term investors. And at the end of the day, an insurance company is also a long-term investor, given it can invest over the longer term. They have a lot to contribute for investing into climate-resistant infrastructure. Let me just mention a few points of why it's so important. And that's really my key message today. I heard Minister Su saying, and also others, each country is different, for sure, but we also need to have standards. If you think about global capital can be denominated in different currencies, but they will go where there is ease for investment. And that's why you need to have standardization. That's why you need to have a tradable infrastructure asset class at the end of the day. And long-term investors, insurance companies, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, they can contribute quite a lot, but also MDBs and also the way the Belt and Road Initiative is being structured. Let me mention what I really mean. If you look at the financing needs, it's really amazing how big they are. Look at the IFC report. It's $2.4 trillion of investments into low-carbon infrastructure only in the Belt and Road Initiative countries. $2.4 trillion. That's about 1/3 of the GDP of China. It's really huge. And for that, you need to have a market. For that, you need to have a private capital market. You need to have more green securities. We have too little green securities. If you think about more globally, the Belt and Road Initiative definitely is the biggest and one of the most important initiatives out there, and it's positive for growth. But globally speaking, if you think about the needs, infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure needs, the OECD puts the number at $6 to $7 trillion. So that's almost the size of China. And that's not just accumulative over the next 10 years. No, that's each year
number.
over the next 10 years, $6 to $7 trillion of investments. And no way that A, the government can fund it themselves, and neither should they. B, you need to have the role of the private sector. You need to go down the road, in my view, of PPP, public-private investments, and you need to develop an asset class. It's pretty clear. In terms of where we are, in terms of developing an asset class, there is still a lot of talk out there, but not much implication and words being put into action. What we believe is really needed is a pilot transaction. A pilot transaction leveraging on the existing know-how and agreement between the public and private sector on what the best standards are for bond documentation as well as disclosure. But we really would need to have a pilot transaction with the private sector together with an MDB, Multilateral Development Bank. I think you don't have to look very far. AIIB is pretty close, right, in Beijing, and it has a very good staff. It's fresh in terms of perspective, not fresh in terms of thinking, lots of shareholders as well as capital. So I'm just asking, what does it take for us to wait until we really have the first pilot transaction? We really need to get standardization out there, and for that, the best way to get it out there would be to have a benchmark transaction. Now I focused on the investment side because the needs are so huge on the financing. And if you focus on the investment side and if you get that pilot transaction out, obviously you can also flow into ESG factors, no question about that. On why insurance plays a very important role in sustainable infrastructure investment. Think about also the risk transfer that insurance companies provide. And risk transfer is very, very important when you are dealing with so complex projects like solar investments, like wind investments. The risk transfer solutions provide a certain level of assurances and certainty of revenue generation, but it also provides, can provide financing, especially at the beginning of construction phase. And it helps to deal with the complex issues which are very, very high in sustainable and the climate-friendly infrastructure area. So bottom line, tradable asset class, pilot benchmark transactions. There are a few other points, obviously, which could also help in having a tradable asset class, which is regulation, to have a more supportive regulatory stance. If I think about a few years back, 5 years ago, the Bank of England and FSB chairman Carney was spot on. Climate risk is systemic risk. And China, when they had the G20 leadership, brought it also back to the G20 arena and led the green finance study group and action points. That's all positive measures being put into place. But I think it would be also worthwhile to think collectively within the G20, how can we, if climate risk is systemic risk, how can we have regulatory system into place? And here I'm thinking also about capital charges, which incentivizes the right risk-taking and makes a difference between infrastructure investment, which is climate-friendly, and an infrastructure investment which isn't. My really last point, transparency, super important. If you need to have much more transparency, global capital markets going to where there is ease of investment, transparency plays a large role. So that's why I also think having an online registry of PPP transactions, being also public and disclosed publicly when you have renegotiation of PPPs, I think would go a long way to provide the transparency which is needed for the investors. So to summarize, transparency, integration with ESG, transparency with the data, debt disclosures, and third, incentives, thinking about regulation. These are things I would have in my mind, and we have in our minds as a long-term investor as well as an insurance company. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for the discussion on green finance-related issues on Belt and Road green investments. Now, let me touch upon the G20 Green Finance Study Group, which you mentioned. For those of you who are not familiar with that topic, China in 2016 was the presidency of G20, and China initiated this G20 Green Finance Study Group. And I had the honor to co-chair the study group together with my colleague, Michael Sharon from Bank of England. And that study group discussed a few issues you mentioned, including the standards. So there's a broad agreement that we should move towards some sort of harmonization of green standards. But it was unable to reach agreement because the 20 countries have very diverse demands and preferences and so on. What I feel is more feasible is for China and Europe to agree on something, because China and Europe are the two largest green finance markets. And if China and Europe are agreeing on a set of new standards to be adopted by, for example, cross-border green capital flows, for the Chinese to issue green bonds in Europe, for Europe to issue green bonds in China using the same standards, that could be adopted by many other countries or regions. That's one way to push for harmonization in a more effective way. And the second point you mentioned is product. How do we channel the huge amount of institutional money, for example, insurance companies and so on, which are holding tens of trillions of US dollars to infrastructure? What we need to do, again, under the G20 Green Finance Study Group, is to securitize many of the green loans which are lending to infrastructure projects. And the China-UK Green Finance Task Force is now pushing for a pilot program, namely taking a Chinese green loan in infrastructure and package them into ABS or CLO, and through some channels sell to global investors, including insurance companies in Europe. I think if something like that is becoming or proven to be successful, it can be replicated very easily on a mass scale. Good, we have the first round already. Now let me just ask 赵部长这个问题，就是
So my question to Mr. Zhao is that from the perspective of your ministry, what new measures are in the pipeline to further facilitate green BRI? Green BRI is a continuous process. We just had a start. In 2017, our ministry and NDRC, together with Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Commerce, jointly launched a guiding opinion on Green BRI. In the future, we will continue to follow the guidance of this opinion. And it's a very long document comprising 4 pillars and 13 sectors. And we will focus on the following 5 areas in the future. First, actively participate in global green and climate governance. Through the BRI Green Development Alliance, we will try to cultivate a network for green development so as to facilitate the attainment of SDG 2030 and offer Chinese solutions. Second, we will build more harmonization mechanisms for Green BRI at the level of policy, planning, standards, and technology. And we hope to see more specific user cases for the implementation of certain principles and standards, and also to align the priorities of BRI with the green development agenda of different host countries. We will also collaborate with BRI countries to make planning. Third, you also mentioned earlier the importance of green finance. We will provide guidance and also encourage the financial sector to innovate their products to support Green BRI, and also encourage investments from the private sector into green projects. Fourth, we will also cultivate a green project management mechanism by leveraging the existing big data platform. We can leverage data and information to jointly avoid and hedge against environmental risks. Last but not least, we will focus on enhancing interconnectivity of our peoples. And in the future, we will further leverage the so-called Green Ambassador project to offer more training opportunities and also people-to-people exchange to jointly shore up our capacity building. For China, we will boost the training programs we now have for BRI countries. I just mentioned that in the coming 3 years, we will offer another 1,500 training opportunities. And South-South climate cooperation will also be further implemented to support developing countries in coping with climate change. So these are the specific areas we are going to focus in the future. Well, thank you for your introduction, especially the South-South cooperation you mentioned to help the developing BRI countries, including low-income countries, to generate a larger impact with, in many cases, very modest investments. We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to open the floor to questions. Do we have microphones? Okay, the gentleman in the middle.
Professor at the Botanic School of Government at Oxford University. Thank you for these great comments. My question is for Minister Chanthol and Vice Minister Zhao. We've heard a lot about the greening BRI in the context of removing, if you want, the risks and externalities associated with infrastructure investment. But I want to ask about the positive side, because as Mr. Haegeli said there's a huge need for infrastructure to drive the transition to sustainability. We need more renewable energy, we need more public transportation, we need a lot more investment to achieve the sustainable development goals and their targets the countries have set. So I'm curious if in the context of Cambodia's NDC under the Paris Agreement or Cambodia's plans under the Sustainable Development Goals, if you've had conversations with your Chinese counterparts about how BRI can be used to advance those goals, have you discussed those? And if so, what have the results been? And if not, can we think about these new processes around BRI, the greening, the coalition, et cetera, as a way to advance those conversations going forward?
Minister?
Well, as I mentioned to you, that the support from the BRI for the infrastructure is extremely important, especially for the country like Cambodia that just came out of war and destruction for 30 years. So we are very, very hungry for all the support to build infrastructure. And our ideas on the first wave of our investment, okay, we consider all the EIA, but how can we move very fast to integrate Cambodia together inside our country and integrate Cambodia to our neighboring country so that we can grow our economy? So we did that. Now we are in the second phase now that we probably pay more attention to the impact of the environment. Now I have one project that took us like delay for 3 years now. We're going to build a road that connects two provinces in Cambodia. But today, that area is flooded. People can row a boat across from one side to the next. But when we build a road, we have to raise the level 3 meters. So it took us like 3 years to look at fish migration. What the impact of the people that row the boat across that area, but now we're going to be a road. So we need to build more bridges. So it's going to cost more, but we are very concerned that the road to be built will impact the lives of the people that crossing that section all the time. So more road, more culverts for the fish migration and so on. So that right now we pay more attention. We build a lot of hydropower plant in Cambodia with capacity of 1,400 gigawatt, right, in Cambodia. But now we shift to solar energy. We also shift from a coal. We have a few coal-fired plants, but we're going to shift from a coal-fired power plant to gas combined cycle, but cleaner for Cambodia. But to your point, we need to build as fast as you can the infrastructure in Cambodia to support the growth of our economy. Because of infrastructure investment, Cambodia has been growing at an average of 7% per annum for the last 20 years. And with that, the dividend that we get from the infrastructure investment and economic growth is the better standard of living for our people. Now, the life expectancy in Cambodia increased from 56 years in 1998 to 70 in 2018. You talk about 14 years. Life expectancy increase because of economic growth. They have better access to healthcare, have access, to drinking water and so on. So by having infrastructure, better infrastructure, they have better access to the service that can improve the standard of living in our country.
More questions?
Yeah, my name is Jeffrey Low with BSF. 我叫娄劲峰，来自德国巴斯夫公司。我现在就
Okay, I'll ask the question in Chinese. I want to start by thanking all the panelists for the comments. You mentioned the risk brought about by climate change. We also heard discussions about the regulations and standards. So my question is that we have a lot of business with carbon emission. So for the Ministry of Environment and Ecology, is it possible for you to formulate a set of standards to monitor carbon emission, for example, for a certain project, for example, 1 kilometer highway, or for Yili group, per liter of milk you produce, how much carbon is emitted? Can we formulate a standard to calculate and monitor and also an ongoing monitoring mechanism. Because at my company, we are also debating the solutions together with the local governments and banks to see how we can calculate the total carbon emission embedded in our product, so that in the future, apart from the financial statement we make, we can also release a list of carbon emission. So any measures on the part of the ministry? Indeed, I agree with what you said. To cope with climate change and also the ongoing air quality battle in China, it all boils down to concrete actions and measures. Actually, not long ago, my ministry launched a new document called a carbon neutral guiding opinion. For example, for this forum, how much extra carbon do we produce? We can try to offset the carbon footprint of this activity by buying carbon neutral energy from hydro power plants, or by making extra investments in forestation projects. So this is a project we recently launched to balance the carbon footprint of certain economic activities. For thermal power sector, we are in the process of creating a carbon trading market. For each thermal plant, they have a different portfolio, and so for how much carbon we can allocate to each thermal plant, it entails a very detailed process of measurement, and it's a very challenging and time-consuming process. It won't be achieved overnight, so we are adopting a step-by-step approach by overcoming challenges by sectors. Any more questions? My question is also to Minister Zhao. I am a reporter from Economic News. So we are in the process of building so-called green cities in China. So or park cities, green cities, how do you see the relationship between green cities and industrial allocation? So park city means green city, right? Yes. So in my view, I think it's a question about function designation and function allocation. For any human society to develop, you need to designate different function zones, including heavy industry. We have many legacy assets that are detrimental to the environment. Many cities in China are trying to upgrade their system to reduce emission from the transportation sector and many other measures. This is a very important campaign, but it's a process driven both by concept but also by technology and also by planning. One such example is the new economic zone in Xiong'an district of Hebei province. This new economic zone will follow a completely new set of philosophy for urban design and urban planning. In other cities where they have legacy industrial complexes within the city, they are trying to relocate these assets to the outer suburban areas and transform those old complexes back into parks and greenlands.
It's a bit You're from Ford Foundation. You probably have thought about this a lot. How philanthropists can help green investment through, for example, lowering cost of funding. For example, if you can provide a guarantee to lower the perceived risk, or you can provide interest subsidies to cut funding costs so that you can mobilize, with $1 of your investment, maybe $100 of private sector money. Now, this is relevant because it's supposed to be done by government, but most governments don't have that much money. And it's supposed to be done probably by some multinationals, but their capacity is also quite limited. Can the philanthropists help?
So thank you for asking that question, and I think it's relevant to the discussion. Philanthropic capital is the most patient kind of capital that there is, right? So a foundation can, because most of the time we give our money away and we never expect it to come back. So if we are able, oftentimes in a sort of a complex investment environment, our impact investing, we can contribute the sort of highest risk capital to a project to get it sort of going, right? And once we put in some capital, then sort of next layers of capital can come in that take different levels of risk, right? So government would take a certain level of risk, the private sector would take a certain level of risk. And so the structuring of the project might be able to be going forward if a philanthropy can kind of come in and take the riskiest part out. That's one approach. I think we've also, the Ford Foundation has been thinking about, is it possible to work with others to set up an impact fund for the Belt and Road, in which a lot of the time a fund-of-fund kind of structure has so many fees involved that the investors don't want to participate, but if a foundation can just bear the cost, the transaction costs, the fee costs in that kind of a fund, then maybe that could incentivize other capital to come on board. So these are some of the kinds of ideas that we are thinking about at Ford. Obviously, we can't do this alone, and we need other actors and other partners to join together with us. So that's certainly one way our capital can be used. And the other, really quickly, is we can fund research, we can fund capacity building, we can fund a lot of things like that that contribute overall to everyone's sort of advancing in the sector.
One more idea I had when I was in Africa. In fact, just last week, Tsinghua University was hosting the African Green Finance Forum together with Casablanca Finance Cities. We were discussing the possibility of getting some money to subsidize the green bond verification costs. Because a lot of green bond issuers, for example, those from Africa, complain that if I issue a green bond, I need to incur additional cost of maybe $100,000 per verification report. That's why I'm reluctant to do that. I'd rather to issue regular bonds and invest in non-green projects. And I was telling the conference that if we can mobilize $2 million per year, then can subsidize 20 green bond issuances. And the leverage is massive. You probably can mobilize, maybe 20, 30 billion US dollar through $2 million, dollars of a donation to the subsidy on verification. So that's a kind of, I think, high impact, spending that philanthropists may want to consider.
And really one of the greatest things to think about would be to bring in Chinese philanthropy, because there are now Chinese foundations as well as international ones to do it together, which I think could be even more powerful. So I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. I think we only have 20 seconds to go. Let me just wrap up very quickly on a couple of key points or key takeaway I think we have generated in this 1 hour session to implement many of the great ideas on pushing for green Belt and Road, especially on the investment side. We need better standards, more transparency of the impact of these projects. And we need to have the right products which will connect the investors to the projects. And we need a lot of platforms, including those initiated by the Environmental Ministry, led by Mr. Zhao and others. And we need to do a lot of capacity building, especially for countries which are just starting to build their domestic financial system. So with that, let me thank you all very much for attending this session, and let's have a big round of applause for our speakers.